I'm sharing time, last Cancola, and I want to move the motion on behalf of Sinn Féin here tonight in relation to jobs. In doing so, I want to be able to give a voice to the many skilled workers left, unfortunately, on the dole queues, the full-time workers reduced to part-time hours, and importantly, those who have had to leave the country out of economic necessity, a generation lost to a nation, sadly. The government have made much of the state of the economy that they inherited from the previous administration, and there is no doubt that the years of the Fianna Fáil government were an economic disaster. Nobody on this side will argue with that. The massive job losses from 2007 to 2009 were quite clearly the outworking of the economic failure of Fianna Fáil policy. However, the continued high levels of unemployment are no longer a symptom of an economy that is contracting. The high levels of unemployment are now the cause of the continued economic stagnation. Quite simply, Minister, an economy cannot grow and it cannot deal with the deficit or deliver the first-class public services which is needed while several hundred thousand of our citizens are unemployed and with over 80,000 potential workers emigrating every year. Our families and our communities cannot afford the cost of unemployment. Yet this government continues, sadly, to follow the failed policies of the previous administration while expecting a different result. And last week, this government celebrated 2 years in office. This was a government that promised jobs would be a #1 priority. Yet 2 years of Fine Gael and Labour and unemployment is still at the same levels as it was in the final 6 months of the Fianna Fáil administration. Now, some ministers have claimed that this government has brought stability to the levels of unemployment. And stability of unemployment is not a boast, nor should it be a boast. Hitting the bottom and staying there is definitely not any legacy that any government should be proud of. The Taoiseach Eamon Gilmore last week said that jobs was the first thing on his mind every day when he woke up. And this is from a minister in a government that has no issue shedding 30,000 public sector jobs. That is posts for guards, nurses, teachers, doctors. And if that was in any other sector, there would be a call to action against that employer. Last year, the Taoiseach himself announced that this government would support the creation of 100,000 net jobs in the economy by the year 2016. And last year, the economy lost 12,800 full-time jobs. It's clear that we are now further away from the figure the Taoiseach announced last year than what we are now. Over the last 2 years, there were significant changes in the labour market. We have seen an erosion of workers' rights, the loss of hours for workers, an increase in long-term unemployment, an increase in emigration, and some of the highest rates of unemployment, youth unemployment in Europe. It's clear that this government has not made good on its promise to deliver jobs, and to be honest, that is not surprising when you follow the policies of Fianna Fáil. So I am left with no other conclusion that job creation is not the #1 priority for this government. The strategy of this government seems to have been to sort out the banks, to keep Europe happy and hope that it all turns out okay. Michael Noonan's strategy seems to be one of taking one for the team in Europe. And in doing so, communities, families and the unemployed are sadly viewed as collateral damage in this strategy. And all the while, the unemployment and the immigration continues and the debt issue remains unresolved. There seems to be an acceptable level of unemployment and an acceptable level of immigration for this government, and that is fundamentally wrong. It is wrong for our people and it is wrong for our economy. The failure of the macroeconomic policy is replicated in the contradicting policies of the various departments. For instance, Minister, in your own department, you want to promote the SME sector, yet public expenditure is doing their very best to cut that particular sector out of government contracts. In my own brief in education, we hear a lot from the government about a knowledge-based smart economy that is supposedly based on a very well-resourced education system that is flexible enough to produce students with the skills to prosper in an ever-evolving economy. Yet the government is failing in its aim even in that, because all of the rhetoric which is coming in relation to building a knowledge-based economy is being undermined by the countless cuts which are being implemented across the education sector. Last year, for example, over 1,000 workers were recruited from abroad to fill IT jobs because employers in this state could not find enough suitably homegrown candidates. The number of workers hired from outside the EU has almost doubled in the past year, and an estimated quarter of all new IT jobs are now filled by people recruited from abroad. This growing skills shortage comes at a time when more than 434,000 people are on the dole queues. And yet the government is trying to entice workers to take up technology careers through conversion courses, as they're called. The government is failing, in my opinion, to empower citizens and open up new opportunities for them through education, because this government has lacked the vision that we saw implemented in many other EU states when they were in recession, to actually ring-fence funding for initiatives in education that can make a real difference. Cuts imposed in the education sector have, for example, resulted in the loss of the Modern Languages Initiative, language support services, educational resources for traveller children, increases in the pupil-teacher ratio in PLC courses, which is going to result in a reduction in the type of courses which can be offered, and also we're going to lose specialised teachers in that further education sector. The very specialised teachers we should be nurturing and relying on to educate the next level of workforce which is coming through. Unlike this government, Minister, Sinn Féin, our starting point is jobs, and getting our people back to work will grow the economy and will tackle the deficit. It's about investing smartly. It's about investing to get our people back to work and to enhance competitiveness in our economy. But despite the resilience of our homegrown business sector, the private sector cannot make the investment necessary and at a scale to deliver a substantive impact on unemployment. Before the budget, we produced a job strategy document that would have seen a €13 billion investment in projects that would create and sustain employment, would create up to 156,000 jobs. This included investment in broadband, transport, infrastructure, schools, regeneration projects, green technology and sustainable energy. But it also included initiatives which would tackle the barriers to competitiveness, such as ending upward-only rents, developing progressive commercial rates and tackling regional disparities. Now, I'm not for 1 minute, Minister, suggesting that we have all the answers on this side of the House in relation to tackling unemployment. But if we look at countries such as the US, for instance, it's clear that an investment and stimulus programme is required to sustain and promote employment. And the latest figures coming out of the US demonstrate that a consideration and a welcome growth in jobs as a result of investment and stimulus. This in turn will impact on the deficit and generating spending in their domestic economy. And it's clear that a new approach and a new strategy is required from this government. Last week, Jack O'Connor spoke at a Sinn Féin conference to mark the anniversary of the Dublin lockout. And he used the opportunity at that particular conference to call for an alternative to austerity. Now, the alternative to austerity, Minister, is not more austerity. The alternative to austerity is investment. It is about getting people back to work and resolving the issue of the deficit through growth. The alternative is investing in the wealth of the people for the betterment of the people. It is not about continuing the policy of Fianna Fáil in handing that wealth to bankers and bondholders. And I would urge this government to just, for one moment, just to stop the spin which is coming out. I would urge the government to recognise that in boxing off the bankers, if you want to call it that way, and hoping for a growth is not a strategy. Hoping for growth is definitely not a strategy. And I would urge this government to begin in earnest to invest fully in our people and in business so we can get people back to work.